Hello, dear lovely YouTube watchers. I've forgotten how to do YouTube recording using Zoom this morning because I got fed up with trying to figure out the OBS and how to make the square where I'm talking small or big or whatever. Anyway, we're going to cut that bit out now because I have to cut a lot of my jibber jabber out because I know you're not going to watch it. Here's my thing. I'm still thinking about this woman who has been pulled up for tweeting. And I've been watching a lot of videos actually around the world, people talking about it. It is big news, isn't it? Let's see. Yay, a lawyer weighs in. Black Belt Barrister. That's great. Let's see. What has he got to say about this? Because I'm still going on about the freedom of speech business. Because it does feel to me as though the government have swooped in and cracked down.
Well, as usual, it's not quite that simple, so stay tuned. Welcome back to the channel. First of all, a little request from me to you. About 70% of you that watch my channel regularly don't subscribe. Now,
You know what that is? People don't subscribe because they're usually watching it on the telly, and it's not easy to subscribe when you're on the telly. So since he's had it, if you wouldn't mind subscribing to my channel, that'd be great.
I get millions of views every month, but I don't have millions of subscribers. I'd love millions of subscribers. That means I help a lot more people. So please hit that button and I'll be very grateful. So I've had, as you can well imagine, with everything that's going on, lots and lots of messages and emails asking me to talk about this very issue. If we have freedom of expression, which we do in the United Kingdom, it's protected under Article 10 of ECHR, and the courts do generally uphold freedom of expression quite robustly. That might not feel like that's the case right now, because you read about people who are being arrested for things they post on Facebook or videos they stream to YouTube, and hopefully I can give you some idea of why that might be. Because whilst we do have the right to the freedom of expression, it is not an unlimited right. You can't just say absolutely anything and everything that you wish, because the law does restrict what you can say to a degree. Now, there's also a link with what we will refer to as a hate crime, and people have been wondering what that is, and so I'll hopefully explain a little bit about that as well. And so you can better understand what it is that you can and can't say, and so that you keep yourself out of trouble. If you watch my previous video, I said that lots of people will be tempted to make comments online. That was a blanket guidance. Just don't say anything if you're not sure.
Here's the thing, if you look at what's happening online now, look at any of the YouTube channels talking about the riots, underneath all the comments are people just saying wild things. I think what they're trying to do, are they trying to test this law?
Video because it can get you into trouble without you really intending it. So let's take a closer look at this. If we take a look, for example, if we take a look at the Public Order Act here, we've got all sorts of different public order offences, from riot, violent disorder, affray, fear, provocation of violence, intentional harassment, alarm and distress, etc. Now, and there's a mental element that goes along with these.
A mental element that goes along with those, intentional harassment. A lot of grey areas, right? Who decides whether you intended it or not? And often in these cases, sounds like on Twitter, it's not what you intended, it's how the other person is feeling about it a lot, right?
Now, this one is one that causes a lot of people confusion: intentional harassment, alarm or distress. So if you think about things that you say and the intent behind them, there's always what we call the mens rea, the mental element, as well as the actus reus, the act of doing something. The doing is the thing that you've done, and the intentional element is the mental element. What did you mean? What did you want to do at that time? So if you make a statement, let's talk about fruit to be completely neutral. If I said, I don't like apples, then there's no offense there. Obviously, substitute apples with any kind of race, religion, sexual orientation, or any other protected characteristic, whatever. I'm talking about fruit as the entirely removed example. If I said, I don't like apples, then ordinarily that's probably fine. But it does depend on the circumstances and the context at which I do it. Because if, let's say, I was protesting against apple farmers, if that's what you call them, and I turned up and I'm standing outside shouting at them, I don't like apples, then obviously there may well be an intention on my part to cause harassment, alarm, or distress. And so if we go into section 4A here, it says a person is guilty of an offence if, with intent to cause a person harassment, alarm, or distress, he, and then it sets out what exactly this must be. He uses threatening, abusive, or insulting words or behaviour, so I could be holding up a sign, that's part of behaviour, or disorderly behaviour, or displays any writing sign, that's the sign bit that comes in, or any other visible representation which is threatening, abusive, or insulting. Now, whether it's insulting or not is a question of fact, and it comes down to whether those words do in fact amount to something which is insulting. Now, there's
another thing, isn't it? Who decides what's insulting? These judges have got a difficult job, haven't they? But you can easily get into trouble with this. I can see how people are scared of this, because what's insulting to somebody in Essex right, might easily not be insulting to someone in Surrey, right? And there's all those class ranges and all those different sensitivities of people. Who decides what's insulting?
A very controversial distinction here between our Public Order Act and the new Hate, Crime and Public Order Scotland Act of 2021, in that you'll notice that this is a similar offence of stirring up hatred. This does not include a defence, whereas in ours, under the Public Order Act, Section 4A, it is a defence to show that you were inside a dwelling and had no reason to believe that the words used or behaviour used or whatever else would be seen by someone outside of that dwelling, or that your conduct was reasonable. So here's the controversial point, at least as against Scotland. Now,
hold on, let's listen to this again. Most replayed.
Whereas in ours, under the Public Order Act, Section 4A, it is a defence to show that you were inside a dwelling and had no reason to believe that the words used or behaviour used or whatever else would be seen by someone outside of that dwelling, or that your conduct was reasonable. So here's the controversial point, at least as against Scotland. Now, if we said that at home, and we've no reason to believe that anyone else outside our four walls said it, to a degree, you can say what you wish and express yourself within your own family, and so long as no one else is likely to see it, then whilst I don't condone that sort of behaviour, that is a defence to show that you're at home, no one else is going to see it, no one else will be affected by it. But that is absent from Section 4 of the recently come into power, at least, Hate, Crime and Public Order Act, Scotland Act, because this doesn't provide a being at home defence. So this is an offence that can be committed in private, which is why it's so controversial. Now, again, when we come back to the mental element here, and we look at what is the mental element, a person is guilty of riot, only intends to use violence, person is guilty of violent disorder if he intends to use or threaten violence, and regarding sections 4 and sections 5, only if he intends his words, behaviour or writing or sign or other representation to be threatening, abusive or insulting, or is aware that it may be threatening, abusive or insulting.
Exactly. So it's the intention of the person who is doing the twittering, writing.
Now, let's take my rather silly example of apples for a moment. If I were just standing there saying I don't like apples, then it still depends on the circumstances whether I might be aware that that is either threatening, abusive or insulting, because certain things in certain places may be abusive. For example, we've had public space protection orders protecting abortion clinics, prohibiting people even from protesting outside of those areas, even if that was by silent prayer. Now that stirred up quite the discussion, because people were arrested for praying silently in their head, because they were doing it within an area that was within a public space protection order, which said you can't do that within that area, because they were protecting people visiting those clinics, and they considered it on balance of things to be abusive or whatever, and so they prohibited it with this public space protection order. But what really is insulting? What does that mean? Well, it is not a question of law. It's a question, as I said earlier, it's a question of fact. Now, reference and credit here, Barrister Quentin Hunt on criminaldefencebarrister.co.uk. Feel free to check that out as well. We very often look at the ordinary meaning of a word in the English language. And yes, that really means we look at a dictionary sometimes, quite often, in fact. When we want to look at what a word means, we'll look at dictionary definitions. We'll even put those into pleadings to say the ordinary meaning of this word is as follows, and then quote the dictionary definition. If it's a particularly flowery word and that not many people will use and that we think someone else has just plucked out of a thesaurus to make it look more flowery, we might even then use two dictionary definitions within the pleadings or within whatever to contrast what we think that really was intended to mean by that party at that time. So insulting is just something that is rude or offensive. And case law has looked at this and said that the words insulting should not be taken or legally defined beyond the ordinary meaning. In other words, if most people think that it is insulting, threatening, or abusive, or something that can be rude and offensive, then that can be insulting language. And so coming back to the wording of the legislation here, if it can be shown that a person has intended to cause a person harassment, alarm, or distress by using threatening, which is more obvious, but I'll come back to that in a minute, abusive or insulting words or behavior or showing signs and things like that, then that might amount to a public order offense, which is why when you write something or you say something or you'll turn up and you do something, because this includes behavior, then all of the circumstances are taken into account. So with all of the riots and everything going on at the moment, it's all in a context. It's not in a vacuum. It's not an isolated incident. If you're walking down the high street and you see some random person shouting into the air, "I don't like apples," then it might just be their opinion of what they're saying. But if they are saying it with the intent of causing a person or a group of people that might hear it alarm or distress, and it's considered that that's threatening, abusive, or insulting words or behavior, then that might amount to a public order offence. But when coming back to the legislation again, it is a defence to show that the conduct was reasonable. And again, what does that mean? Well, that is a question of fact based on the circumstances, based on what's happened, and everything else taken together. And this, of course, is balanced against the right to the freedom of expression. Because you can probably very quickly, and I deliberately chose wording that is somewhat ambiguous, "I don't like apples," you can very quickly realize that this could turn into something very nasty. If someone was standing there shouting, "I don't like apples, nobody should like apples, everybody should remove apples from the food chain," or whatever, clearly that is much more likely to be insulting, abusive. If, to continue that example, that person was standing outside an apple orchard, as I mentioned before, it is much more likely that those words, which are now likely to be abusive or insulting, that they intended them to cause somebody harassment, alarm, or distress. And so now let's move to what we refer to as a hate crime, because a lot of people have asked questions about this and might not fully understand it. No, there is no single or specific hate crime as such, but there are lots of different offences that can become a hate crime. And that is typically where the victim or maybe a witness will perceive any such hostility towards that victim within any of the offences that are being committed as being motivated by a protected characteristic. For example, disability, race, religion, sexual orientation, transgender identity, and so on. And again, there is no specific legal definition to the word hostility. We just revert to the ordinary, everyday dictionary understanding of the word hostility. You will know if you walk outside, if you see one person being hostile to another. And so if you see someone and you interpret that as being hostile, then it is hostility towards that person, be it the victim or a witness. And then if the victim or a witness perceives that offence to have been motivated by any kind of hostility arising from one of these protected characteristics, then that can be prosecuted as a hate crime. And the offence of that, of course, is that any sentence will be more severe, because it will not just be the offence itself, but it will be an aggravating factor that it is a hate crime and therefore punished more severely.
It's a hate crime. It's a hate crime. It's the emotion behind the action. It's a hate crime. I mean, I know in Italy they have crimes of passion, don't they? In England we have hate crimes. So it's illegal to feel hatred or anger or put your negative energy to attack and against a protected group of people. Which sounds reasonable, but we've missed out on the point of, well, let's educate people into how they're going to deal with those feelings. You know, where's the anger coming from? Where's the rage coming from? And a lot of that comes from things that are led to believe in the media. But if you've read for years in the media and newspapers about how awful it all is, and that builds up, and then your anger and hatred spills over, you're then guilty of hate crime. So then we're back to, where are people responsible for their own actions and their own feelings? So people get sort of conditioned, brainwashed into believing these things are true, and then they find themselves on the receiving end of a jail sentence.
Now, coming back to the posting of things online, as I mentioned in my other video, you don't have to be at one of these incidents, such as a fray, violent disorder, riot, etc., to be guilty of one of these public order offences. You can be inciting any of those things by posting messages online, because these sections have a specific reference to incitement of such an offence. We also, of course, have the Malicious Communications Act 1988 and the Communications Act 2003, which incorporates the sending of communications, which might be emails, messages, social media posts, which are also intended to cause distress and anxiety to the recipient. For example, if somebody were to make a post or send a message to say that I will find you, I will hurt you, things like that, then of course they are going to be malicious communications and they will be an offence. It is not a defence to say that you have the freedom of expression to say anything you wish just because it's online. And so in many of these cases, it really is crossing that threshold between that which is the freedom of expression, for example, responding to somebody's post and saying, well, I think you're wrong, I think you're full of rubbish, I don't like what you've said, I don't like you for saying what you've said. But then if you escalate that to the point that you are making threats, for example, somebody says all that, but then adds on, if you say that again, I'm going to come and find you, that obviously then becomes threatening and crosses a legal threshold, which makes it an offence. And this is all why in my previous video I said think before you post, because just by posting something that is inflammatory or specifically targeting any group or encouraging others to target a group or encouraging others to commit any kind of offence might itself be incitement, which means you, the poster of the message, might then be liable. That would be quite different, however, than, say, political speech to say you strongly disagree with the government policy and you think the government is wrong in allowing certain policies to continue. That would be political speech so long as it's within the realms and confined to calling for peaceful protest or calling for government policy change. This would typically be protected as free speech under Article 10. And so finally, coming back to the Facebook posts and the YouTube videos, without speaking about anyone in particular for obvious reasons, generally they are going to be situations where they've crossed a threshold from that which is merely expressing a view, even if in strong terms, even if it's words or behaviour that might on the surface be unattractive or unreasonable, that might not cross the threshold. It needs to be something more, which is and is intended to be insulting, abusive, and crosses the threshold to be that which is oppressive or unacceptable. So
honestly, when you look at these, I'm just thinking what this woman tweeted, you know, the one that's been arrested. She speculated, she guessed, she said if this is true. I mean, it was stupid what she did, but I honestly can't see how what she's done and what she's tweeted meets any of these criteria.
Tailing all of that off, there is no single answer to any single question. It is always, it depends on the circumstances, what was done, what was said, when, where, why, what can be proven, what can be shown, and what was going on at the time. So if somebody turned up at one of these protests and it was quite clear that there was an intention behind it, then it's going to be much more difficult to justify what's done and said. But of course, every case turns on its own facts. Every case must still be proved to the same criminal standard. Every case may well have a defence, and one of the defences many people are likely to raise is that their conduct was reasonable in the circumstances, because that works both ways as well. What is reasonable conduct in one situation may not be reasonable in another, and so again it's a case-by-case basis, and it will be a determination of whether that conduct was reasonable if that defence is raised. But I hope that has provided a useful overview.
Wow, what do we think of that? What do other people think of it? If intent to cause distress is a crime, then my electricity bill should be immediately prosecuted. Same with the TV licence and their harassing letters. I'm just going to put a little reply to that. Not to mention DWP and claiming benefits. I often send threatening letters to scare you half to death. And they're designed to scare people half to death. Don't let us lose a sense of humour. People are being upset about this. The idea that we should be policing and regulating insults is so dumb. Yeah, it really is. That offends me, and that's actual assault. And this is the thing, isn't it? If everything is based on a person being offended about anything you say, if you get somebody who's easily offended or who wants to get you into trouble, all they've got to do is say they're offended and hurt by that. And this is ridiculous. It's just like a thin end of the wedge, isn't it? I just really am disliking this free speech business that's being curtailed. That's how it feels. The beginning of Labour's police state by David Starkey. A chilling effect on free speech. Yeah, I don't think that people are overreacting about this free speech business. I don't tend to overreact about things, but this is upsetting me. I'm offended by this new rules. It's not about the person, it's about their rights. If someone can't handle online insults, they need to grow a pair. So there's people being insulting online in the comments about this. See, that's insulting, right? That's insulting words. I'm an American, and I believe it is childish to believe we should all walk around trying to not offend anyone, especially when the world has become as polarised as everything has begun. And there's said something about God. I'm not going to repeat what that says because I'm pretty sure that you're not allowed to say those things. You're making some form of loaded question. No one is saying one should be verbally abused, but there is always context, nuance and intent. Speech is mere words. If you can't take offence from another without crumbling, then do not engage with others. It's very simple. I do not know of a single person who has genuinely felt that they've been assaulted and or similar via speech. Not one person. Targeted abuse is completely different, but mere off-the-cuff remarks to randoms on the internet is just not it. Certain elements are going out of their way to be offended nowadays while attempting to push an agenda, and that is my point as well. It is you cannot be offended, but you can use that as a weapon against somebody who's just being reasonable. It's mind-boggling that we have the police resources to stop people from saying mean words online, but we lack the resources to attend actual crimes. Yeah, it is crazy. George Orwell. If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. That is so true. And then someone's put, why would you even say or even think any of that? Just the fact that you have bothered to write that is disturbing. It's not disturbing at all, is it? We are spiralling into tyranny, and that's how I feel about it. Have spiralled. Yeah, because the thing is, it says it's been like this for years for many people in the UK, but now it's upscaled to the mass majority. Spiralling for decades. Here's the problem. You can't make people use kinder words or restrict their expression of speech under fear of being arrested. I'm amazed there are any YouTubers out there still being able to speak. Someone's put, it feels as if Britain has fallen. It makes me feel sick to my stomach. Anarcho-tyranny is a social condition characterised by a combination of anarchy and tyranny where the government is simultaneously ineffective at enforcing laws against criminal behaviour and overly oppressive against law-abiding citizens. Trouble is, when the police turn a blind eye to anything the apples say or do, but then arrest the oranges for being unhappy about it, and of course blames the bananas for it all. What if the bananas are behaving in a way that is distressing and aggressive for apples? But if the apples have also acted in ways that are distressing and aggressive for bananas, why do the apples seem to get treated better than the bananas when they're both fruits? I think you confused apples with apples. Yes, I did. Sorry, I'm fruit blind. Then the apples can leave the place where the bananas live. Then the bananas kick the apples out. Arrest a woman praying, but not arrest armed men with machetes. No news on the guys that seriously attacked police at Manchester Airport. Arrested someone for silent prayers. Are you kidding me? This country has lost the plot. More people have been arrested in the UK for tweets than in Russia. Let that sink in. That's a quote from the Joe Rogan. I mean, none of this is funny, right? This is not funny. You can stand on any street corner and say whatever you like until people start listening to you. My mum used to say you can't hang a man for his thoughts. Even that seems to be proving difficult. You can't pray in your head for starters. Just ignore everything they say. It's very simple. We outnumber them. They cannot control all of us. Say whatever you want. Don't self-censor. Because the UK, in their fight against fascism, actually became fascist. Communism is not fascism. It's a collective oppression, so it's pretty much the same thing. Some freedom of expression, sometimes for some people in the country, is not freedom of expression at all. It sounds to me like everyone on the internet is in danger of being arrested. Hate crime is just a way to infringe on free speech. I prefer America's take on free speech. Here's what you can say. Throw out criminals in prison to make room for keyboard warriors. What a joke. Would those keyboard warriors be the ones I saw attacking people based on race and attacking police and setting fire to public property and looting shops? Those keyboard warriors. What if these keyboard warriors are the ones influencing this criminal behaviour? And it's that, isn't it? It's influencing the behaviour. The keyboard warriors weren't even at the riots. I don't think people would be upset with the looters and rioters getting jail time. Oh dear. Dear oh dear. Seems like BBB is basically saying freedom of speech isn't dead, but to avoid getting into trouble, it's just safer to shut up. Obviously, it's safer not to speak. Because anyone could take what you say and say, oh, that's why I did this crime. Yeah, I was influenced by that. Anyone can draw offence or insult from most every combination of words. I'm very tired of how dystopian Britain is becoming. The purpose of freedom to expression is not to punish someone for having a different idealism or beliefs. I wonder how many of the protesters find it offensive to be labelled far right by politicians and journalists. Badge of honour at this point just means you're upsetting the right people and being mocked by the rest of the country. First they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, then they win. Again, it's about intent. They may be wrong, and a person has every right to take offence at the error, but assuming a political stance is not in itself hateful or speaking out against a person. This is a disingenuous use of Gandhi's words. He was promoting non-violent protest. When others use violence against those who are peaceful, they look like violent thugs, then you win. So in these riots, who was sitting peacefully? The people inside the hotel or the people burning bins and screaming outside? People like saying this, just let this sink in, don't they? You know, and I get the feeling there's more people leaving comments on YouTube than there are leaving comments on Twitter under this. As a concerned grandmother, I find the PM calling me far right offensive and bullying. Oh dear. Don't go looting, Nan, you'll be fine. Leaving her house is illegal now. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. 1984. Hate crime is open to interpretation and is truly dystopian. Yeah, it totally is. You spent 30 seconds saying we have free speech and then spent 17 minutes demolishing your own conclusion. Well done. Yeah, this video is astonishingly self-contradictory. An age-old saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Fed up with all these people being offended, yet I can't be offended by government and bureaucrats interfering in my life without my consent. Aren't the people meant to be in charge? It's the same with all public places. Any form of rude or threatening behaviour will not be tolerated, and yet I'm supposed to just stand there and take it. All the incompetence of most services like GPs, insurance, banks, etc. They can do whatever, or rather not provide me a good service, and I'm not allowed to get upset. Yeah, this is the thing, isn't it? You can get upset, talk about your frustrations, contact NHS Trust, escalate complaints to banks and institutions. There are so many levers for you to pull when you get upset. You have no clue what NHS workers have to deal with whilst treating people that are calling them racist and bigoted things. Whilst they're treating these abominations, they're just meant to take it and treat this absolute melt, yeah? What a colossal bell. See? Now, saying these words, that's insulting and offensive, right? Calling someone an absolute melt is insulting. Saying someone's a colossal bell is insulting and rude. Am I still allowed to say it? Okay, so the person replies, what do you think I've been doing for the past 15 years? All of those things. The point is that all of this adds up, and nearly all issues I had were completely avoidable if the other person just did their job properly. Why does it take all this stress and effort to have things right? And why did you just call me a bell? Didn't you know that rude and violent behaviour will not be tolerated? That's the point. No. No what? No, the people are not meant to be in charge. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. UK has freedom of speech. Makes sense when you see it that way. It's clear that the power chooses what is hate speech. With freedom of speech comes responsibilities, as it can carry serious consequences if used to willfully harm others. That is why we have libel laws for defamation, which can and does often lead to the unwarranted ruining of people's lives, reputations and businesses, or even put their lives at risk. Example, you can't just call your neighbour a pedo on a public forum without serious consequences, especially if it isn't. It can also lead to the loss of a home by the perpetrator, and I would imagine a lot of regret throughout the rest of their life. Ignorance of the law and why it exists leads to brain farts. It is clear that the power chooses what is hate speech. I never realised how grateful I should be for the First Amendment until I heard a British lawyer cheerfully tell me to be careful about what I say. How can you guys not see the potential for abuse here? I'm going to put we can see it, but we're not allowed to say. The more you take free speech away from its citizens, the more anger builds up over time. People, can we have freedom of speech? Government, no. We already have freedom of speech in the UK. Freedom of speech in the UK. Nobody says anything. Anyway, I've run out of time, dear lovely people. Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye for now.